Good morning and thank you for joining us. You're watching BizCheck live from Broadcasting House. This is indeed our national headquarters. And this morning, we're going big on budget. And of course, we'll be breaking down the numbers for you. What the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury said, the interpretation, and of course, what was not said. We're going to look at all those scenarios. Plus, we'll be focusing on the crisis that is unfolding in the Middle East. Oh yeah. You know the Israel and the Iranian conflict, which is threatening the global order in terms of supply of oil because of the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical artery in the global oil supply chain. We'll be looking at all the scenarios and how this is likely to impact the cost of oil and the cost of production here in Kenya and of course in Africa. I told you my name is O'Brien Kimani and you're watching BizCheck. Our reporters are on the ground and of course tracking all the happenings. And of course, we're also keeping an eye on what's happening in Karen. The cabinet retreat is taking place right there. And of course, we shall be communicating to you the resolutions of the highest decision-making body in the country. If you just want to chat with us, our X handle is at KBC Channel 1, at O'Brien Kimani is my Twitter handle. And of course, let's keep talking and discussing the issues that we are facing as a nation. But I told you we want to go heavy on budgets. You see, on Thursday last week, it was Budget Day in 4 East African countries of Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, as well as Tanzania. And Kenya, of course, I mean, being the economic as well as military and political heavyweight, you know, it's unveiled a budget of about 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings, which is going, this is the government's expenditure plan for the next financial year, that is, we are talking about 2025, 2026. And of course, those numbers, you know, are startling as always. I'm joined by two gentlemen who are going to help us in breaking down those numbers and, of course, breathing some sense into those numbers. And I'm talking about Kenneth Kahora. He's a tax manager at PKF. He's on my extreme right. Kahora, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for having me here.
And in the middle, the man in the middle, as we always say, we have CPA Wycliffe Bichanga. He's a council member of ASPAC and, of course, a tax practitioner with Cliff and Company. He's also joining us this morning. Thank you very much indeed, Bichanga.
Thank you, Brian.
I just want to take you back to Thursday, and I want to start with Kahora. I mean, for those 2 hours and 20 minutes that you know, the Treasury CS, John Bandy, you know, went through reading those speeches on budget. What was jaw-dropping moment for you?
Very good. Thank you for having me this morning. I think what we can see from the budget 25-26, the government is really playing a very tough balancing act here, between trying to mobilize revenue and at the same time trying to bridge the deficit. At the same time, we see government has so many programs that it's trying to sort of implement, and that, of course, requires a lot of money. So from maybe my takeaway from this was maybe we look at the sectors that were actually sort of got the benefit. We're looking at education sector, though there is still a bit more room to improve. We saw there is going to be money for the fertilizer subsidy program. So basically it is a very tough balancing act, considering where we are coming from. We are seeing the revenue authority really trying to meet their targets for the year. And with this deficit sort of creates a very heavy pressure on the government in terms of trying to which programs do you prioritize and which ones do you sort of shelve for a later date? Yeah.
I want to hear this from you, and this is where I want you to help people understand. I mean, for all, you know, since February when the budget policy statement, you know, came out, I mean, all along we've been knowing how much the government is planned to spend in the coming financial year. And of course, when the estimates were tabled in Parliament, sometimes in April, I mean, so we could see this is what was going to education, this was what's going to security, agriculture, and all these. So what was happening on Thursday? Because all along, I mean, we knew the budget. You walk in the street, you could hear people talking about 4.2 trillion shillings. This going to education, this going to security. So what was the minister doing on Thursday?
Yeah, so from what we're seeing, he was basically giving the budget policy. As you're saying, the draft was actually issued earlier in the year, and basically trying to show what priorities the government is going to focus on, and sort of trying to see of what the money we collect, or whatever we are going to borrow, where are we going to really put it into place. And I think the interesting thing, it came the backdrop of there having been some issues and some protests. So we are seeing sort of the two things culminating. We're seeing the government, by having a look at the Finance Bill 2025, they actually don't expect to raise so much additional revenue. I think the estimates by the Planning Committee, the Finance and Planning Committee for the National Assembly, we're talking about raising about 24 billion shillings. So you can see, in terms of trying to raise more taxes, the government has sort of moved away from that, and it's just trying to sort of create a very good tax policy environment where they're able to maybe access more information. I think you've been hearing the issues of e-teams and the likes. So I think at the end of the day, the Cabinet Secretary, he did a good job, but given what the scenario that we're dealing with, we're talking about the high interest payments. It's really a very hard balancing act. Yeah.
Yes, Bichanga, I mean, what would you describe as your jaw-dropping moment?
Thank you, Brian. For me, and I totally agree with what my colleague has said, the minister really tried to balance it out, because you have a situation where you do not know, you know that you do not have a lot of leg room to increase revenue collection measures, but at the same time you've got expenditure, you've got programs that have got to run. So when I listened to the minister, and I think in his preamble, he actually did say that in this budget we've not increased the taxes. Then he went further to say, which something that I was very keen on, was on the issue of reducing the tax rates. He did say that he has been a proponent of reduction of the tax rates, and that they did a simulation of a reduction of the tax rates, but then when they looked at the reality in terms of what KRA has been able to collect, they then realized that it was not possible to do it now.
Was that a political statement from where you stand?
I want to believe him. I want to believe the CS. Because he has for sure been consistent, especially when he's in the opposition. He was consistent in terms
but
of
now
saying,
things are different. In
terms of saying we need to reduce. And I sort of agree with that mindset that the tax rates, high tax rates, do not necessarily mean high revenue collection. So when he says that he believes the reduction of the tax rates may lead to higher revenue collection, I want to believe him. But until we actually see it happening, we may doubt, just like you are doing right now. But I'm keen, and I want to take that as a statement of intent, rather than doubt him. I want to say that the intention is there, and I think we will be keen to see in the future what happens on that space.
Of all the numbers, you know, that he was juggling with, from 702 billion shillings for education to 47.7 billion shillings for Parliament. Which number moved you the most?
To me, it's actually the number of about more than, in excess of 900 billion that we'll have to borrow. To me, that is the number that struck me the highest, because you have debts of 11 trillion, you are then going to borrow 900 billion more. So we're looking at a debt level of about 12 billion. So to me, our debt position is the most worrying at this point in time. But when you look at now the allocations sector-wise, it was not a surprise that education got the lion's share at 700 billion. That is commendable, because as a country we've got to think about our education for sure. But allocating about 138 billion to health was a little bit shocking, because we've got to be deliberate in our health. According to me, we think about education, we must think about our health as well.
Yeah, and that's why I want to hear from you. I mean, look, and he's bringing a very valid point. I mean, you know, what is the biggest challenge that we are facing today that is hindering our socio-economic development? And one would say that our health infrastructure and our health systems, you know, are not faring as well as they should do. And so when you talk about less than 150 billion shillings, going into health, and then you have 707 billion shillings, going into education sector, where should we focus our the lion's share of investment? Is it on health? Is it more on education?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think in terms of priorities, you cannot really put one ahead of the other, because in as much as you want our students to learn, if they fall sick, they will need to be able to access the hospital. So I think it's also usually a balancing act. Where do you take money to where it is most seen, or do you take it to where there is the most need? Yeah, so we know there is a very huge need when it comes to education, and there is also a very big need when it comes to health. And I think the argument around health is...
So if you, for example, sorry for stepping on your shoes, I mean, if you are, for example, the cabinet secretary, I mean, for Treasury, between putting in more resources for education and putting in more resources for health, which would you say would be your priority?
Yeah, I think if you look at, first is, let's look at who is in charge of what. So the education, the national government is actually in charge of it. But when it looks at health, it's sort of a devolved function. Mm-hmm. So the argument should be whatever is going to those health programs, the question is, is there sort of a duplication? Is it the same thing that the counties are doing? Mm-hmm. What sort of programs are these that the national government is really into? As opposed to education, where we know there is an issue with capitation, there is an issue with exam fees. So the government should actually really be focusing on where its mandate is, and that would be actually education. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you also, some aspects of education, I mean, is also devolved. For example, when you look at the early childhood education, I mean, that is where that's the work of the county government. And also we are seeing a situation whereby members of parliament are also investing a lot in education, in building classrooms and all that. But when you also look at health, which is a devolved item, where the national government is left with managing the big institutions, like Kenyatta National Hospital and so much, and of course, formulating policies, where the counties are in charge of, capacitating those hospitals. But when you look at the expenditure by counties that goes into health, it's less than 15% of their budget. And when you look at, for example, the development vote for health, I mean, it's less than 5%. So the health industry in Kenya is in a crisis, and more so the public health. So then, where should we strike a balance between providing people with the healthcare services that they need most for them to go about their daily life, or investing in education?
That's a very good question. So I think in terms of priorities, it's a very difficult, because at the end of the buck, there is only so much that the government is able to collect in terms of tax revenue, mm-hmm. and whatever other appropriations in aid, and the borrowing from domestic and foreign. Mm. So we are sort of dealing in a place where we have sort of a limited budget, and whatever we have, you can see that actually the biggest percentage of it was actually about over 700 B was provided to education. Mm-hmm. And so you can see that it is actually a priority for the government, mm-hmm. but at the same time you cannot prioritize one end, mm-hmm. at the expense of the other. So it's all about a balancing act. And we can see in as much as they're trying to allocate some money to the health industry, mm-hmm. we are seeing also some tax measures that sort of were some of the efforts that the government is trying to do. So, for example, hospitals, zero-rated, that to exempt would mean that it would increase the cost of Medicare. And what this tries to explain, and we saw that the budget, the committee in charge of finance and national planning actually listening to some of those recommendations, mm-hmm. and agreeing to some of these. You see, like the incentives of the reduced tax rates, we've seen that some of them have actually, they're recommending deleting some of the provisions in the finance bill. Mm-hmm. So we are seeing that there is a focus on health, but the tax policy does not really speak to the same intention of the government.
I want to bring Bichanga on board on this issue, and I really want to hear from you. I mean, I still want to be to hang around the education allocation, and you know, we very fast, and we must appreciate that you know, technology is playing a big role in how things are done. When you walk around this country, you see so many classrooms that are under construction. You see a lot of money being directed towards, you know, building physical classrooms, you know, hiring teachers and so much. But that is not where the education is going. Education is moving away from the classroom, okay, from the four-walled classrooms that, you know, we were brought up in. It's going virtual. In China, they're having a concept of students learning from the comfort of their houses in a virtual setup, whereby you just have a teacher, you know, stationed somewhere, but they just need to go to classroom when they need to do practicals, okay? Are we really investing in the right places when it comes to education, our investment in education?
Thank you. Very good question, which takes me back to matters of planning as a country. How do we sit and plan for the future? I think as a country, this is an area that we've not performed very well. Are we always forward thinking, or do we just react to circumstances? For example, technology did not just happen. We've been seeing the trends over the years. Did we ever sit down and say, now, this is the situation. We know we have always built classrooms. We know we've always looked for land to build physical schools. Are these schools really viable in the era that we are in, or even the era that we are getting to? I do not think that kind of discussion has happened. So what we've done is that live as usual. Then one day we'll just realize, you know what, it's no longer viable to do these classes. Then we'll probably now leave our buildings standing there as we move to the virtual era. So I just want to say, not just in education, but as a country, we hardly plan for the future. We hardly look what is going to happen and what is even coming. I mean, Brian, you must have remembered in Nairobi a day when we knew that we are going to do a dual carriage on Uhuru Highway, but we saw planting of trees happening. Then in a few days later, that was put down. We put stones. That was put down. That tells you the country that we are in. And I think it's about time for us to now start being strategic and being very purposeful in our plans going forward. And going back to the education sector, you remember even the CBC issue that we now have. It just got us off guard and without proper planning. Now we must start thinking of 5-10 years to come. But even as we say that, I remember sometimes back when we came with Vision 2030, do we do our planning around that? We don't. So it is a little bit hard being forward thinking. So you will see that even in this budget, we're going to build more classes. You will see that even our own MPs will spend CDF, part of the CDF kitty, building more classes. And because building those more classes gives you mileage at the grassroots. So it's no longer about
It's more of a political
plans.
statement.
Absolutely. And that is our tragedy as a country, if you ask me.
Look, for example, another issue is road, you know, the transport sector. 217 billion shillings, you know, going into the road infrastructure, you know, expanding roads and recarpeting roads. But more interestingly, 300 million shillings for the Nairobi BRT. We've been talking about this, the BRT, since 2009. That's the first time I covered a story about the BRT in Nairobi. And at that time, we were basing our arguments on what was going on in Bogota, Colombia. You know, the city of Bogota was facing a major gridlock that threatened to stall a movement in that city. And so the government of Colombia came up with a beautiful, well-done BRT system, which is a classical case. You know, it's quoted all over the world. And so Kenya wanted to follow in that footstep. but that was in 2009. We are in 2017, 2025. We're still talking about conceptualizing or a BRT system in Nairobi. We have allocated 300 million shillings. I want to take you to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. They've managed to put up a beautiful light rail system that crisscrosses the city of Addis Ababa, reducing traffic by more than 55%. Should we still be talking about putting up a BRT? BRT is not the future of transport. Light rail system is the future of transport. And when you travel, in most global metropolis, they don't talk about BRT systems. They talk about underground metros, overhead maglev train project. Is this another case of us missing the point in our allocation?
Absolutely, because a technology that worked and was relevant 16 years ago cannot be relevant at this point. I agree that a rail system is the way to go. We've got to think about it as a country, and the best way to even think, because we've got to look at this thing wholesomely.
Yeah.
When you sort your transport system, you sort several other problems. Even the issue of affordable housing will be catered there. Are we able to have a train system that moves people from Nakuru to Nairobi in real time? Am I able to live in Eldoret and work in Nairobi? That, according to me, that will be a progressive way of thinking. Because then we'll no longer be talking about slums in Nairobi.
Yeah.
We'll no longer be talking about the water shortage in Nairobi. So that one act of sorting a transport system is likely to give us solutions in very many areas, including the health that you were talking about, and even schools.
I want you to hold your thoughts on that, because we'll be coming back. Because you're bringing in a very interesting concept, of living outside the city but still working inside the city. If you're just joining us, we're having a what you'd call a cool conversation with two gentlemen who are very well versed with matters tax, and we are looking critically at the 2025-2026 budget, which was the speech was read on Thursday last week, and so we are following in their footsteps and of course asking ourselves some tough questions. This only happens on BizCheck right here on KBC. I just want to take you to the Safari Park Hotel, where our reporter Alan is on standby. What's happening there? You have architects and quantity surveyors. They are meeting there. He's about to give us an update on what's happening and who we are expecting there and what we are expecting them to say. Alan Aoko, it's great to see you. What do you want us to know?
Morning to you, O'Brien. Yes, you are correctly saying it. We are at a conference that has brought together quantity surveyors, architects, and most of the stakeholders in the built environment. In specificity, we are at the launch of the Architects Quantity Surveyors Registration Board, BORAX, conference, which is actually themed empowering the built environment professionals in Kenya. And this is where it gets interesting. This is through artificial intelligence. They have come together in this conference, a two-day conference, to talk about how they enhance the built environment using artificial intelligence. And just before we came to do this link, a presentation was just starting just before the official opening ceremony, where they were presenting how artificial intelligence can be used by the stakeholders, the quantity surveyors, the architects, making models of buildings and streetscapes and landscapes using artificial intelligence, where we saw a demonstration of how these professionals are using gadgets to model 3D visuals of a building, and from the start to the end, just to see how their work can be more streamlined and how their work can be more modern in this case, where to avoid cases where there is demolishing of buildings and remodeling of buildings after a building has already been made, and also making this the issues of encroachment into the neighbor. So that is what is happening here. They're just convening here to talk about issues of streamlining the professions that they have using artificial intelligence. And you talked about who is expected here. And yes, we do expect the Cabinet Secretary for Roads and Infrastructure, Davis Chirchir to make his way here. He's not yet here yet. And we also expect the Principal Secretary, State Department for Public Works, Joel Arumanyang, as well, who is supposed to be here as well, and a few other stakeholders, like the president of the AAK, architect George Ndege, who will be here to officially launch this conference that is taking place today and tomorrow. And we are hoping to also catch up with them and also catch up and, you know, find out the status of where Kenya is and our cities. And when it comes to urban development, remember, we have issues of urban sprawl in our towns and cities where there is uncontrolled developments. We want to find out what are the professionals doing in this sector and how are they roping in the issues of bad actors who come into the profession and do things in their own way without using the prescribed way as we know it. So that's it for us for now here, O'Brien. But be sure that we will bring you the live link when the chief guest is also speaking just in moments to come. Back to you, O'Brien.
Well, many thanks, Alan Aokun. And of course, you know, I just admire, your deep knowledge on those issues, how to bring in the concept of artificial intelligence in construction. Thank you very much. And of course, we'll be going back to Alan at some point just to get a glimpse of what the people are talking about. There's a conference that is taking place at the Safari Park Hotel, and the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Davis Chirchir, is the expected guest. Well, we're back in studio, and of course, I told you that this is going to happen. I mean, we'll be crisscrossing in many places. And of course, we're keeping an eye on what's happening at that cabinet retreat, which is taking place in Karen. Yeah, so we'll be giving you more information and, of course, a breakdown of what has been said. But we are back in studio, you know, breaking down the numbers and, of course, helping you understand what the numbers are talking about and what story are they telling. I mean, before we went for the break, I was asking Bichanga, transport sector in the allocation, 300 million shillings for Nairobi BRT. He brought in a very interesting concept. Why are we still concentrating our transport sector within Nairobi? Why don't we think about expanding? What stops people from living in Emali but working in Nairobi? Or what do you need to do? You just need to put up an express train that comes to Nairobi, bring people every day here, and of course take them outside the city. Why can't we work and live in Naivasha or Mai Mahiu or Muranga, for example? What stops people from doing that? You just need to put the right infrastructure in place. Please take it on, Bichanga.
Yes, that is what I strongly believe, that let's look at transport, let's look at infrastructure as a way of solving all our problems. Mm-hmm. Okay, not all, but most of our problems. Mm-hmm. The challenges that this country has can be resolved by having a forward-thinking transport infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Let's stop thinking about just Nairobi. Mm-hmm. Let's see how do we integrate this country. How do we make it easier for us to move goods and people from one part of the country to the other? How do we enhance productivity of our citizens? I think when we start thinking that way, we'll be getting solutions for this country. Mm-hmm. Because you look at the amount of time that people spend on the road. You look at the amount of money that is lost because of traffic. Mm-hmm. All that, once we unlock that, we shall have increased our GDP because we shall have increased our production. Mm-hmm. The idea of the BRT, I think it is it's not viable. Mm-hmm. Because we're just talking about the rapid system within Nairobi. Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to say is we must think beyond Nairobi. And again, once you do the BRT within Nairobi, you still have your other problems. You still have your housing problems in Nairobi. You still have your water problems in Nairobi. So in one bullet, we can actually solve all these issues. And I am hoping that we'll now get to that level where we think progressively, we think future. We rather say in 5 years, this is what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. We need to have a proper plan. Probably not something that can just be discussed in one budget, in 1 year's budget, but it has to be a comprehensive plan for maybe 3 years and say progressively this is what we're going to achieve. But I've not seen intentions to actually do this from any quarter.
Kahora, I also want to hear this from you. I mean, every year we allocate budgets to roads, you know, this much goes to these, this much goes to these. Do we ever sit down and ask ourselves, I mean, what is the impact of our investment in roads in our socio-economic development? Because when you look at the last 10 years, you know, the government has invested more than 1.8 trillion shillings in the road infrastructure. But what is the impact of this on the socio-economic development of Kenya? Do we invest strategically? Okay, for example, when we decide to invest in a certain road, do we have any strategic reasoning why we need to invest in this road, and what are the expected returns? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think if you look at it from, there is usually a cost-benefit analysis that is done by I think it should be the cabinet secretary in charge of the roads. And basically before they actually set up a road, they have to do the cost-benefit in terms of what is there right now. And in terms of if we were to set up another structure here, what are the sort of cost savings? Is it going to be in terms of fuel? Is it going to be, as you're saying, easier to move goods and people? Is it going to actually lead to a reduction in terms of what people are paying to move from point one to point B? But if you look at it in the context of what has been allocated in terms of Kenya, if you dig deeper and see what actually is allocated to roads, you'll find that about 85, should be between 80 and 85% actually goes to repairing the roads and rehabilitating the roads that are there. So it leaves about 15% for development of new roads. And that's why you see there is not much traction when it comes to that. And I think the government has realized that, well, it's actually very difficult trying to raise funds for some of these projects. And we can see there is actually a strong focus to move to public-private partnerships, such that we have investors who come, they finance it, they operate it, and then after a period of time is when they transfer to the government. So in terms of trying to bridge the development gap, I think they're looking at the private-public partnerships to sort of bridge in that gap. Yeah.
For example, when you look at such a critical artery like the Nairobi, the Mau Summit, the Bironi Mau Summit, it's one of the busiest roads in this side of Africa. But it has for many years remained a single-lane carriageway, you know, carrying thousands of people every day and thousands of vehicles. And so that will be termed as a critical artery in Kenya's socio-economic development because it connects Kenya with other parts of the region. But look at it, I mean, we've been talking about expanding this highway for how many years now? And we haven't done so. And so that's why I was asking, and maybe you may want to weigh in on this, Bichanga. Do you see strategic thinking in the way we plan our roads, in the way we invest in our roads?
I think the issue in Kenya is that, yes, there's a planning that happens to that level, but we can also not close our eyes and say that for things to move in this country, you've got to have political goodwill. We've seen that before. We've seen projects being decided and allocated because there was political goodwill. So the Mau Summit road to Nairobi is critical. I mean, I remember, I think it was on Easter holiday, and people were stuck all the way to Nakuru on the road.
It happens like almost every weekend.
Exactly. So you will then think that what you're talking about in terms of being strategic and saying, okay, fine, this one affects most of our people, we need to move. But we also have to ask ourselves what happened of the SGR. There was expansion. There was talk of expanding the SGR to Busia, I think, or Malaba. We must ask ourselves what happened to that as well. We've not had any talk about that at all. So it has, maybe it doesn't just have to be the road. There are many options of transporting people. We've got to think about this strategically. But at this point, I'm not convinced that we've been very intentional in terms of looking at areas that we are able to achieve the best results. At times, there are other considerations, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you see, when you look at the road that we are talking about, the Mau Summit, the Bironi Mau Summit, know what I mean? Look at the areas in terms of tourism, okay? It has the capacity to open up tourism in that region, you know, in a big way. Naivasha, for example, you know, has the capacity to become a major MICE center if that road was expanded. But today you don't want to go to Naivasha because you're not very sure what time you're going to get there and if you're going to come back the day you intend to because of congestion along that highway. Look at Lake Nakuru National Park. It's also a very beautiful and a strategic national park where infrastructure to get to that point, you know, should be first class, among many other areas of interest. And that's why now I want to get into tourism. First of all, tourism being trumped together with sports, heritage and culture. For me, I mean, it should be a no. I mean, tourism should be a standalone a concept on its own or allocation on its own. 6 billion shillings to this critical industry. We've been talking about increasing the number of arrivals in this country to 5 million by the year 2027. I mean, it's a long shot, definitely. But with this kind of allocations, is it really possible for us to achieve that number? And are we investing the much needed resources in this industry, which brings in massive resources in terms of foreign exchange?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. In fact, when you bring the story of Naivasha, I remember something like Safari Rally. And you can imagine the amount of foreign exchange it brings in terms of, and the global attention in terms of people knowing what Kenya is and what actually it has to offer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are some of the avenues you look at, and there is a lot more to do. If you look at the sector itself, even in terms of the tax proposals that they intend to make, they really do not favor the sector. But we see as the cabinets, actually the Committee for Finance and National Planning, they actually do listen to industry players. And we can see that there is sort of a middle ground in terms of them trying to spur investments in that sector. Mm-hmm. But I totally believe that there is a lot more to do. And considering Kenya is a hub, we're an East Africa hub, we have a lot of actually attractions in the country. So this is a place that the government can actually mobilize, put more additional funding in terms of trying to get the much needed exchange rates. And of course with them coming, there is a lot of economic growth in terms of the hotels and people providing the services to the tourists. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bichanga, what do you feel?
I feel that it is, again, just going back to being intentional. Mm-hmm. Have we been intentional enough? Again, I still believe not. But I must say that most hotels in the country have recorded very good numbers post-COVID. Mm-hmm. And this has been attributed to the growth of the local tourists, mm-hmm. that Kenyans are now more intentional. I think there's a joke that on COVID, people realized that, oh, I could actually very easily go before I visit Masai Mara, for example. Mm-hmm. And the Kenyans have now been out there visiting more. So as we encourage local tourists, let's not forget our traditional market, the foreign, because we have attractions in this country that you cannot find anywhere else. I think the country that comes closer is Tanzania. And we've seen Tanzania trying to take our market for some time because we are told that they have been intentional in some areas. So we must jealously protect what has been ours, mm-hmm. and even take it further. And I will encourage the government to actually be very intentional in this. Let us be known what we've always been known of, mm-hmm. being the destination to go to globally. Mm-hmm. That way I think we're going to earn more, mm-hmm. in foreign exchange, but most importantly, we will be able to now secure jobs for our people locally, mm-hmm. because you look at the hotel industry, it employs quite a lot, but also when you look at the parks, all these, and also in terms of trade, because when we have for more people in Kenya, they're going to buy more because they're spending more. So we're able to achieve most of our aspirations by just encouraging that sector. Mm-hmm. So we must be very intentional on it. Mm-hmm.
I want to give you an example of Egypt, for example. Egypt, this year, they are targeting last year, they had 15.7 million tourists, going to Egypt. So Egypt has two things to offer. It has the pyramids and the desert.
Just that.
And that's all. We don't have the pyramids, but we have national parks. We have deserts, by the way. You go to Lamu, there's a desert just next to the ocean. We have, what's the name of the desert in Samburu and in Marsabit? God, I've forgotten the name. It's a beautiful desert. I've been there. But we don't talk about it. We're still stuck with the concept of tourists coming from wherever, boarding a flight, coming to Nairobi, landing at JKIA, taking a trip to Masai Mara or wherever, going to Mombasa to sunbathe. Tourism has gone beyond that, okay? We have some of the best shopping malls in Africa. You go to Westlands, you're surrounded by malls. You go to Karen, you go to any parts of this country, there are malls. We don't market Kenya as a shopping destination. We have some of the best hotels, in Africa. Some of the biggest conference centers, like for example, Kenyatta International Convention Center, one of the oldest convention centers in Africa, by the way. But we really talk about Kenya, as a big product. Are we investing as much as we need to in this critical industry, which has the potential, by the way, to finance our budget if it is handled correctly, Kahora?
Yep, you're actually very true. If you look at in terms of our global, where are we seen? Let me very good example of Rwanda. Rwanda, you see their shirts, Premier League. Yeah, so with that, it sort of reminds people every time that you can actually visit Rwanda and go see the baboons.
And it's a small
how
country.
Much they pay for, and they pay ridiculous amounts to go visit.
It's $1,000
Yes.
to go and see the mountain gorillas.
Yeah, and they're full. Yeah, so in terms of marketing, I think there's a lot that can be done, as you're saying, some of those attractions. I think we saw a few years back, there were some sort of, I remember the story of the swimming lions. There have been some
in Lamu.
Yes, in Lamu. There have been some efforts, but I think they've not really translated to what is expected. And I think it needs to be a constant, investment, such that you will start to reap the benefits years after the actual investment. Yeah, 13B is not enough to do a lot of these things.
It's not even enough.
Yeah,
I mean, when you consider the fact that a significant portion of that will go towards paying employees, the allowances and all that, then you are left with a very small budget to market this country. And I remember there was a board which used to be called the Brand Kenya Board, and I think it was doing a great job. I used to interact with them a lot. Packaging Kenya as a beautiful tourism, cruise, shopping destination. I mean, they used to do all that beautiful work. And I like the fact that you're quoting Rwanda. Rwanda is a very small country, compared to Kenya, but they are punching above their weight. You see them on screen when EPL is on. You go to Paris, you see big billboards, welcome to Rwanda, okay? You go to those metropolis, you don't see anything like that for Kenya. And yet we have some of the most beautiful sceneries in the world. You go to West Pokot, beautiful, beautiful rolling hills and mountains. You go to the Rift Valley, I mean, amazing wonder you get to see there. And so if Bichanga, you are the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, what would you do in that front?
Thank you for your prayers, Brian. It will happen someday.
Well, if you feel the bill, I mean, why not?
So I agree. We've got, again, what we were saying, we've got to be intentional. Mm-hmm. We've got to think and plan well. I think, just like I said earlier, our planning is always short term. We've got to sit and say, on the tourism front, what do we need to do? Mm-hmm. Have a plan of 3-5 years. Mm-hmm. This is what we're going to do. Let's have a plan. Let's move there. Mm-hmm. Just like you've said, Rwanda, I attended a conference in their conference facility, and I was being told that next week we have this conference, the week after we have this conference, the week after.
That is Kigali Convention
Exactly.
Center.
It is this, after that, after that, after that.
You have to book 5 months in advance for you to get a slot.
Just imagine. So in Kenya, what are we doing? But I'm happy what is coming up on Bomas of Kenya. We really hope it will get to that level. We really hope we are going to market it well. So going back to when I become CS
And we also hope Mombasa is also going to come up. Because remember, we don't have a major conference center in Mombasa.
And we ought to have.
It's our holiday destination. We don't have one.
Yes.
I was wishing that, I would see something like 20 billion shillings for the construction of Mombasa International Conference Center. It's never happened.
I'll actually tell you about Mombasa. As the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, we do have an annual seminar where we always have about 3,000 to 4,000 delegates. We are forced to hold this within 3 venues. So we've got to interconnect the 3 venues to host the 3,000 delegates in Mombasa.
And that is a very small meeting.
I'm telling you. But we're actually able to have a convention center which is able to host 8,000, 10,000. And even look at the situation with our sports and stadiums. You know, sports is also another avenue to have foreigners, tourists in the country. But what have we done with our stadiums? Our stadiums, I do not think we have 2 stadiums in this country that we can say we're going to host a FIFA match. In fact, there's a time Harambee Stars had got to play in Malawi because we didn't have a stadium in Kenya that was FIFA accredited. A very sore state. And I haven't had intentions to get that on track. Even when we have, I think it is this year we have Chan, we're hosting Chan.
Yes.
But our stadiums are still not done. So, Brian, I just talk about the intention, that we've got to be intentional in some of these things. We've got to plan ahead, and things will happen for us.
Things will happen. Let's also talk about the budget deficit, almost 900 billion shillings. And when you look at it, I mean, it's like the entire development budget of Kenya, it will be financed through loans. So the revenue that we are going to generate in this country, will go to sustaining the government. Is that a lofty place to be, Kahura?
It's a very good question, and the sentiments are real. I think you see, even as you look at it, this is on a best case scenario. That if we collect 100% of what we intend to collect, we will still have that deficit. So what if you collect 90%? The deficit grows even larger. So I think debt has been an issue, and it's been highlighted by a lot of players. We're at a place where we need to, it's a critical point where we sort of need to adjust our belts, to tighten our belts, just to make it through this period. And I think basically what we see the Treasury trying to do is also renegotiate some of the loans in terms of trying to bring down the interest rates and sort of ease the pressure on repayment. But truth be told, I think it's about 1.3 trillion needs to go to, it should be 1.1 trillion to go into payment of just the interest on the debt. We're not even talking about repaying any principal amount. So yeah, that does put a lot of strain in terms of what we are able to achieve because that needs to be paid. You do not want to end up with some of the countries that have had a default. It is a very messy situation. So I think the only way is just to tighten the belts and sort of try to, bridge that gap, of which the government has been trying to do, but there's only so much that you can do. You hope the economy will do well. You could get a shock, probably there is a drought or anything that can sort of mess up the numbers and put a lot of strain in terms of what else can you do, because you have to pay. You have to pay the interest on the loans.
For the longest time I've been in this industry, I've been hearing people, experts like you talking about tightening our belts. For how long are we going to tighten our belts without choking ourselves?
Yeah, the thing is, do we actually tighten our belts?
Okay, do we have the belt? First of all.
Because you see a situation where our budget expenditure has been ballooning over the years, then you are not surprised that our debt level has been going up. I remember we had about, I think in June 2020, our debt situation was 6.6 trillion. Now, March 2025, we're talking of 11.36 trillion.
Despite our belt tightening measures.
Yeah, so that tells you...
Hold on there. Hold on there. I want you to hold on to that thought. It's deep, okay? Because we want to go to Western Kenya, Kakamega, where the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission is holding a regional workshop for security officers in Kakamega. And the regional director, Eric Gumbi, is now on the podium. Let's listen to what he's talking about.
One that was grabbed 3 weeks ago. Those of you who may have followed the news in relation to that one, you notice that members of the public came out complaining that land that is adjacent, actually opposite, land opposite the county assembly belonging to the Kenya Railways, initially hosted businesses belonging to several traders. Then they were evicted on the basis that it is government land. But 3 weeks ago, somebody has fenced off that land, and the EACC has already taken over the matter for investigation. The other matter that we have commenced investigations on recently is Busia airstrip, after receiving a report that the Busia airstrip, as it then was, has been subdivided into 163 plots, now in the hands of private persons. In the same Busia, we have also restricted Amoni Market, which is also in private hands, and we are already in court. In Busia also, a public official has grabbed a government house and went to court to be declared the owner. That is another challenge where people grab public land, they get title deeds, and then they proceed to go to court to be declared owners, or even to evict those government officers already occupying the land. In the counties, the situation is different. A grabber comes, colludes with the officials within the county government. They agree that the grabber goes to court to sue the county. And then officers in the county agree not to defend the case, so that somehow there will be a judgment in favor of the grabber. Or while the proceedings are in court, we are with the attorneys in the counties where they are advising their county governments to do ADR. Let us negotiate and just pay. And you are paying for land that already belongs to the county. That is what happened to Kibuya Market in Kisumu. Kibuya Market hosting over 5,000 traders daily. The county government was about to enter into ADR to negotiate and pay because somebody has title for Kibuya Market, but we are in court over the same. So what we are saying is that government institutions, and in particular national government officers, have a responsibility in assisting EACC to prevent grabbing of public property. In fact, the government land that is in the hands of private persons can be utilized in a very big way to support the affordable housing project, because there are towns where the government is looking for land that can be used for that project. It is ironical to see many people occupying those pieces of land, and the EACC will continue to recover and return the same to the public. So my call to you, my appeal to you as county commissioners, county commanders, is to assist EACC by identifying those properties and communicating to EACC so that we can be able to take action. EACC may not be able to know everything, we may not be able to know what is happening where, but it cannot be explained why you would find a civilian government official living or having a residence in a particular area, and then you have a neighbor who is a private person who owns the land next to your official residence in an area that is generally known, even by the most ignorant person, that it is an area set aside for government housing. So assist us in that area. And finally, we are also urging county commanders to also support EACC when it comes to enforcement of the requirement for the appearance of officers. Many are the times that some of your officers are engaged with the commission in matters under investigation. So where people are requested to avail themselves either to write statements, it is important that...
Well, that is Eric Gumbi, the EACC Director for the Western region, of course, addressing members of the security team in that region. And of course, the conversation is around how to deal with corruption and how to, of course, report cases of corruption. We are back in studio. We continue to have our conversation around budget that was presented by the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, John Bundy, on Thursday last week. And of course, now looking at those numbers critically and asking ourselves, some very hard question. The executive retreat is happening at the KCB Leadership Center in Karen. We are keeping an eye on that, and of course, we shall be communicating to you or relaying to you the deliberations coming out of that critical meeting. Well, I am in the company of two gentlemen who have been very gracious in sharing with us, some critical insight, and I'm talking about CPA Wycliffe Bichanga, who is a tax consultant with Cleve & Company, and of course Kenneth Kahora, who is a tax manager at PK. Before we went for that break to listen to EACC, you were saying something. You may continue.
I was talking about the debt situation. So I did say that in June 2020, yeah, our debt level was 6.6 trillion. June 2022, we were at 8.5 trillion. A year later, that is June 2023, we were at 10.2 trillion. And March this year, we were at 11.36 trillion. So that tells you how our debt levels have been escalating over the years. And what is very consistent there is that over the years, we've always had a budget deficit. And that is why we're always forced to borrow. Now, the question that we've been asking, is it not possible to actually curb our expenditure? Is it possible to do what we call zero-based budgeting? We open our budgets, look at the various activities, because it's possible that in those budgets we have budgeted corruption. And that's the B word that we must be very bold enough to talk about. So is it possible? Corruption. Yes, is it possible to open our budgets, look at the various activities and ask ourselves, what is the impact of this activity? Do we need it? Don't we need it? So that we now reduce our expenditure to reduce the budget deficit, because we cannot continue this way. We have, I think our debt level is about 65%, going to 70%.
It's almost going to 70% of our GDP.
Yes, so it's not sustainable. That is the truth. And talking of tightening our belts, we must look at our expenditure, reduce our expenditure as necessary to just ensure that we're within a debt level that we're able to service back.
And the question that I also want to find out from you, Kahora, and Bichanga is bringing in a very interesting point. I mean, our debt level is growing from 6 trillion shillings to about 11?
11.4 actually.
And all along we've been talking about austerity measures, belt tightening and cutting down on unnecessary expenditure. So what have we then been doing? Have we been cutting our clothes to our needs, or are we living in some sort of an imagined world?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So,
well, you always keep on saying that's a good question.
Yes. No, it's some of those questions that don't have really one answer, and really it's sort of a balancing act, yeah? So if you look at it, austerity measures would mean cutting down on what the intended budget is. So we've not been seeing that. We've been seeing the budget increase year on year and year on year, and we expect that it will continue to grow in the same way. So the question is the growth in revenue the same as the growth in our budget? And I think for as long as those two do not meet, then we are going to have a big problem. Because if you try and grow your budget by 10%, but your revenue is only growing by 5%, it means that there's an additional 5% that you'll have to keep on catering on a year-on-year basis. And that's what we see. We see that for what they consider as austerity measures is not requesting for a lot more. You see, we'd have asked for 300, but we asked for 100. So we are sort of tightening our belts. But the issue needs to be, what is this debt actually being used to do? You see, if you take the debt and use it for, say, for example, an infrastructure project that is able to generate additional tax revenue, so in terms of the people who are going to build that road, the people who are going to use it, the tax savings from the expenses that you'll save, it means that you'll have a bit more taxes to pay. So I think the question would be, what are we really using the debt, and is that really translating into additional tax revenue? So for as long as you borrow for recurrent expenditure, it means that I have borrowed today, I spend it today, but there is no future anticipation that I'm going to generate more from what I've done with the debt. So I think in as much as the debt is there, I think there is a plan on how to reduce the deficit to, I think, about, is it 5%? So, but in the process, I think there needs to be an understanding of where are we really putting these monies to. So if you're putting it to generate additional revenue, then that is a good thing. But if it's actually just going to plug in and pay salaries, then that is where the biggest issue is. Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the situation that we are finding ourselves in. And we continue to borrow more. You know, every year we're borrowing more. And it's going to build up. Yes, we are repaying our debt, but at the same time we are borrowing more. And by doing so, we expect our debt situation to improve. How is that going to happen, Bichanga?
And I love the fact that Kaora just brought in the issue with why are we borrowing? And I truly agree. And it's very clear in our constitution that you've got to borrow for development. Why that is the case, and that is why we keep looking at the debt as a percentage of the GDP. Because if you are borrowing for development, our expectation is that that development will then spur production in the country. So our GDP will go up. And we've no problem. I mean, it could be from 11 trillion to 20 trillion. But can we also see a similar growth in our GDP? Yeah? And when you have a situation where the percentage against your GDP is growing, that tells you the growth in debt is higher than the growth in your GDP. And that must worry everyone.
Yeah.
Because it's not just an absolute figure. We're not looking at an absolute figure. We're looking at the percentage to the GDP. So it's that time where we must have this conversation, so that we are breaking the law in the first place, where we're saying when you borrow, put it on development. But you're borrowing to spend recurrent expenditure. So first we're breaking the law. But as it is in many things, no one is taking accountability.
Has it been confirmed that, do we have an institution where we have borrowed for recurrent?
You see, ideally, when you look at the debt, you should be able to know that we borrowed here and this was spent here for this project. But questions have been asked through the Treasury, and they've not been able to link specific borrowings to specific development projects. So your guess is as good as mine.
Like, for example, in the year 2024, 2025 financial year, do we know how much we have paid as debt?
Yes.
Do we know?
I think that was 1.8, I think.
1.8?
Yeah, which was mostly repayment of interest.
Repayment of interest. What about what we call it? You know, the amount that we borrowed, because that is on interest alone. What about on the principal amount? Do we have any idea?
No, I think in the past year we didn't pay any principal. We only paid the interest.
I thought we paid the Eurobond.
It was
Refinancing.
Hmm?
It was more of a refinancing.
It was a refinancing of the Eurobond.
You retire old for a new one. So you just continue holding the debt.
Is that sustainable? Kahora?
Yeah, I think...
whereby you're taking money from this to repay this so that you can also borrow to repay this. So aren't you likely to end up in a cycle of, you know, some sort of a, you know, a square peg in a hole?
It is. If I can give you an example, I think the interest rate on the retired was about 6 point, can't remember the exact figure, but they renegotiated it to about 9.5. So you're actually paying more interest on the new loan. And remember, it is still foreign denominated, so it still has the foreign exchange risks still on it. So it is what it is actually. So we just have to find a way out of the debt situation that we are in. In terms of sustainability, you see, if you're borrowing sort of to give incentives to private sector, then it means that you're really incentivizing the businesses with the hope that they're going to grow, and in the future they're going to bring, you start getting the fruits at that point. But we don't see that with our debt. We don't even know what this debt was used for, so that we can even be able to track and say, okay, out of this, we know that there was this amount, and this is what it was actually able to generate, and vice versa. Yeah.
Yes, Bichanga, you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to say that the debt situation is worrying everyone. And as a country, I think it is that time that we must be very clear that our borrowings affect us. Our borrowings need to speak to our future growth as a country. And I love the conversation we had earlier where we spoke about having development projects being backed by the private sector through the PPE model. So we must seriously think about this, because we must have development, but it's time to think about that, the PPP model, so that we now have private sector running some of these big projects. So maybe that way we'll be able to see now production, because the infrastructure will be working for us, and no money shall have been spent by government. So the private sector will recover their money, but the economic growth shall have been spurred. So we must be, again, intentional in going back to that model and making it work.
And of course, we have seen this model working with the Nairobi Expressway. It has worked perfectly. The government wants to try the same with the Rironi Mau Summit highway, and we hope that that project is launched soon, so that it can alleviate, you know, the challenges of motorists plying that route. Because we have to come to the close of this conversation, so what do you expect to see in the financial year 2025-26? How do you expect the economy to behave? And I want to give each one of you a minute to respond to that. And of course, I want you to tie it with what is happening in West Asia, you know, where now there is a full-blown war between Iran and Israel, which is likely to affect oil production and, of course, impact prices. We start with Kahora.
Okay. So I'll probably take us back to the period 2019-2020 when we had COVID. And I think, remember, we were thinking, this is actually just happening in Asia. It's not really going to impact us. When you look at the Russia-Ukraine war, the same thing. We thought it's a war out there. It's really not going to impact us. But the truth be told is we don't live in a vacuum. So anything that happens out there does have an impact on what really happens here. So with some of the things we are seeing, the escalation of the war in the Middle East, and some of these tariffs that we are seeing the West actually sort of trying to negotiate their way, it actually creates some pressure in terms of the economy, and the economy, the world economy actually reacts to that. So we expect whenever things go that way, they could actually slow down the world economies. And if you slow down the world economy, then we are not going to be spared either. So I think what we expect it's really going to be a tough year trying to make ends meet. But I think we've seen the resilience of Kenyans. We've seen that we've come from worse places, and we've actually been able to overcome some of these challenges that we've faced. If you look at it from a growth perspective, I think Kenya, we are doing well. We are close to about 5% compared to, I think the world's, as of last year, was at about 3.5%.
3.2.
Yeah, 3.2%. So we are saying we are actually doing okay, but it doesn't mean we're out of the woods. I think we just need to continue making sure that we incentivize the right sectors so that they can bring in the economic change that we need to propel us to a first world economy eventually. Yeah.
Yes.
My expectation in the next year, especially as a tax practitioner, my expectation is that KRA is going to tighten the noose more, because you see we have an expectation of 2.7 trillion in ordinary revenue, and yet the best we've ever collected is 2.4.
Yeah.
And to also remember that the Finance Bill 2025 is only expected to bring in about 26 billion. So that tells you, using the current tax laws, KRA is expected to try and widen the bracket. We expected them to be more aggressive in the coming year, because they know that they've got to achieve 2.7 trillion. So that will be an expectation. What I also expect to happen, because if you see that last year we had the Gen Z demonstrations on the finance bill, we don't see those indications now. But my expectation is that in this coming year, we're going to see people shifting their attention to the expenditure of this budget that is before us.
Yeah.
That is my expectation, that we're going to see closer scrutiny on how government spends our money.
Very good. Gentlemen, we have to put a full stop on this conversation for today. Of course, it's an evolving conversation, and of course, expect our calls in the future so that you can come and we can break it down further. Your time is highly appreciated. Thank you very much. I mean, we've been breaking down the budget figures for you and talking to Kenneth Kahura, tax manager at PKF, as well as CPA Wycliffe Bichanga, who is a tax consultant with Cliff & Company, joining us this morning on BizCheck. I mean, I'm seeing time is coming up to 11 minutes past 12 o'clock. Our next conversation is coming up, and this is about upscaling young people here in Kenya and Africa and getting them ready for the future. This conversation is coming up next. I'm O'Brien Kimani.